British voters are getting increasingly gloomy about Theresa May's ability to get a good Brexit deal, but most have not changed their mind about leaving the EU, a new study today reveals. The report by pollsters at Centred found the proportion of voters who think the UK will get a good deal has fallen from a third back in February to just under a fifth, 19%. While the proportion of voters who think the government is handling the negotiations badly has also soared from 41% in February to 61%. But while an increasing number of Britons are losing faith in the negotiations, the poll found that most voters have not changed their mind about wanting to quit the EU. John Curtis, Senior Research Fellow at Centred, said, "Our new data point to two important conclusions. First, voters, including not least those who voted leave in the EU referendum, have become more critical of the way the negotiations are being handled and more pessimistic about what the consequences of Brexit will be." The report by pollsters at Centred found the proportion of voters who think the UK will get a good deal has fallen from a third back in February to just under a fifth, 19%, in October. However, and second, this development has apparently not changed the balance of public opinion on what the eventual shape of Brexit should be. The findings come as Mrs May's Brexit plans have been thrown into turmoil after the DUP pulled the plug on a divorce plan amid fears it would tear the UK apart. The PM is facing a race against time to get the party, which is propping her up in N010, to sign off on a deal before a crunch EU summit in 8 days' time. The at-Centred study released today suggests the government's bumpy ride in Brexit talks are making Britons more pessimistic about the prospects of quitting the EU. In February, 46% of those quizzed thought the economy would be worse off when we quit the Brussels Club, but this has risen to 52%. But the survey of 2,200 people found that despite the turbulence surrounding the negotiations, there has been no major swing away from Brexit. And voters still want the same kind of Brexit, with many voters still calling for an end to free movement. Mr. Curtis said, "Between them our two key findings point to an important lesson. It should not be presumed that growing disappointment and discontent with the Brexit process, of which there already seems to be plenty, will necessarily persuade voters to change their minds about the kind of Brexit the UK should be seeking, or their view about the wisdom of leaving the EU in the first place." So far, at least, voters seem inclined to blame the actors in the Brexit process for their perceived failure to be delivering what voters want rather than draw the conclusion that the act of leaving is misguided. The at-Centred study released today suggests the bumpy ride Theresa May, pictured outside N010 today, has received in Brexit talks are making Britons more pessimistic about the prospects of quitting the EU. A difficult Brexit could simply prove politically costly for Mrs May and her beleaguered government rather than a catalyst for a change of heart amongst the public about Brexit.